In this video, I want to show you all promising underdogs, the best inexpensive favorites, and the best bets to consider for this weekend. I'll also provide my final probability for each fighter's victory, along with their stat differentials. If you find this informative, helpful, or entertaining, please like and subscribe. It really helps keep me motivated to create these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you want to support me there. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier. The premium tier gives you early access to all of the analysis and results from my videos, along with the additional data analysis and stats. This includes my prediction model results, fighter history, stat overviews, promising underdogs, best inexpensive favorites, prop bets to consider, and deep dives into each fighter's record and historical fights. So you'll get to see their strengths, their weaknesses, their consistency across different stats, and their stat comparisons versus all of their historical opponents' averages. All of this combined will help you with your picks and bets. There's a $20 a month tier, which is around $5 per event, and you can also purchase each of these separately, but the membership is cheaper and easier. Plus, you're directly helping with the improvement and expansion of the content for this channel. Running this data, analysis, and prediction models takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate any support that you can show. And thank you to everyone who has shown me support recently. Also, if you like detailed breakdowns and predictions, I do those weekly for full cards as well, including prelim fights, so feel free to check those out on my channel. Let's go ahead and jump right in. First, let's take a look at promising underdogs. The fighters' names are on the leftmost column, followed by their probability of victory that I presented in the prediction video from earlier this week. These probabilities are not only based on several data science prediction models that are trained for accuracy, but also on qualitative information such as the fighter's momentum, their recent performances, their career's trajectory, psychological factors, their training camps, their weight cuts, and any other available information out there. I've also provided the stat advantages for each fighter compared to their opponent, excluding differentials where one of the fighters has a 0 in their stats in order to avoid misleading information. Alright, so for UFC 307, the first promising underdog that I want to highlight for you guys is Juliana Pena. So Juliana Pena in this matchup, she's 1 year younger than Raquel Pennington. She has a reach advantage of 2 inches. She absorbs about 1 less strike per minute. Juliana Pena also lands 1.04 more takedowns on average. She has a 28% higher takedown accuracy, and she lands a little bit more submissions on average as well. All things considered, I'm giving Juliana Pena about a 39% probability of victory, and I know that that may not seem like a lot, especially when it comes to a, statistical probability, but I think that Juliana Pena has a lot of intangibles that sometimes go a little bit unnoticed or, she doesn't get some credit for, and I want to highlight why she may be a bit of an opportunity for us at UFC 307. So for starters, let's just zoom out and look at her record real quick. She's won 12 fights. She's finished 75% of those fights, which is kind of rare for women's MMA, so that is a little bit impressive. Believe it or not, she's had 11 fights within the UFC, and she's won 8 of those. And so that's another key thing that sometimes goes a little bit unnoticed when talking about Juliana Pena. She's won 8 of her 11 UFC fights. Recently, she's done pretty well too. She's won 3 of her last 5. She is coming off of that major loss, that key loss. But there's a couple reasons why she could bounce back and some advantages that she has over Raquel Pennington. So let's talk about those. So the few key areas that I see Juliana Pena doing really well at, especially when it comes to this particular matchup, it's going to be first and foremost when it comes to grappling and takedown ability. Not only does Pena average more takedowns per 15 minutes compared to Pennington, but she's also better when it comes to takedown accuracy. I think it's like 55% versus 27% is what we had discussed in the previous video earlier this week. So if the fight gets to the ground, which oftentimes it's inevitable when it comes to MMA, then she could take a little bit more control there. And sometimes that's all it takes. You just take a couple rounds, score, and even if you get 3 rounds under your name compared to 2, all of a sudden, boom, you're the winner. So that's going to be a key that she could really, narrow in on and focus on. Now, also keep in mind, when it comes to Pena's game plan, she does sometimes apply some aggressive pressure and pace. She's kind of known for that aggressive style, and sometimes she could really turn it on when it comes to, her opponents and fighting. So if she does that, she could wear Pennington down a little bit, especially when you consider the altitude of UFC 307. It's going to take place in Salt Lake City, Utah, so keep in mind, altitude's going to be pretty high up there. So another thing that I would mention for Juliana Pena is that, she's going to be looking for submission opportunities where she can in this fight. She does have more submission wins than Pennington does, even though I think it's by a very small margin, maybe one, I believe. So if she's able to take the fight to the ground, she could have a little bit of an edge when it comes to submission. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but what I am doing is trying to highlight some opportunities for you guys. And so if you're ready, we're kind of leaning toward Juliana Pena to try to get maybe an underdog in your picks and try to find some value. I do think that she's a good underdog on this card, honestly. I mean, there's not a lot of underdogs that I can say have a good probability of pulling off the upset, and there's only 3, as you could see. But Juliana Pena is, she's an honorable mention for this. Now, I also want to mention she does have a reach advantage. It's a slight reach advantage. It's only 1.5 inches, but if she is able to kind of capitalize on that, she could kind of keep Pennington at a little bit of a distance. I'm not going to focus too much on that because oftentimes we see fighters not use their reach properly. They do in boxing and stuff, but not so much in MMA. So if she is able to capitalize on that, that's just another aspect that I wanted to mention for you guys. I think it's going to be one of those fights where Penny's going to come out very aggressive and she's going to look for that early finish. And especially with her coming off of that long layoff, I think that she's going to, personally, I think that she's going to avoid a 5-round war. I think she's going to go in with a huge round 1, round 2 kind of game plan. She's going to look for that finish in those earlier rounds before cardio kind of really becomes a factor for her and things start working against her, and before Pennington gets very comfortable, fighting against her. So I will also say, looking at Juliana Pena and her fight film footage throughout her career, I've noticed that her boxing has improved over time. And so I think that paired with some of those reports that came out that did mention that she is improving her boxing skills, when you take that into consideration, that could be another thing that we see unfold this weekend, and it could kind of tip the needle towards Juliana Pena's favor. Honestly, what I want to say is that I think she has a better chance than the odds are leading us to believe. And so that's exactly where the opportunity lies. And full disclosure, guys, I am leaning towards Raquel Pennington. She is the pick, or she is my pick at least for this particular fight. But I do think that Pena is a fighter who has some good paths to victory here if she's able to implement a really good game plan and kind of focus on that grappling and some of her submission skills and a little bit of her boxing skills and aggression while avoiding Pennington's striking. I think that if she does it well, and we'll find out early on, believe it or not, this first and second round is going to tell us the story of the fight at least. At least that's what I think. But bottom line, Pena does have a little bit of an opportunity here. All right, so the next 2 fighters I can vouch for, and I think they're actually my picks, and I can vouch for them, and I think that they are going to pull off the upset here. So for starters, I want to talk about Jose Aldo, the legend himself. Now, Jose Aldo, some of the statistical advantages he holds in this matchup are that he has a reach advantage of 1 inch, he absorbs 0.26 less strikes per minute, he has a 7% higher striking defense, a 9% higher takedown accuracy, and a 25% higher takedown defense. All things considered, using the statistical analysis, but then also looking at research outside of stats and just really focusing on momentum and the intangibles and the qualitative factors for both of these guys, I ended up going with Jose Aldo. Now, the statistical models disagreed with me here, but I went against them, and I just attribute that to human input over machine input, and I think that it's very important. We could see that in Jose Aldo's previous fight. I actually went against Jose Aldo in his previous fight, and I ended up making a huge mistake. Aldo is doing very well even in this late stage of his career, and he deserves that credit. And it's not just luck. Honestly, it's his experience that's really taken over. He's found his confidence again after going through a really rough slump, after taking a terrible loss to McGregor within 13 seconds. It was a huge speed bump in his career, but we're seeing a completely different Aldo now. We're seeing a classic version of Aldo, one of the best versions of himself that we've ever seen. So I like that momentum. I like what I see in his fights recently, and I'm really going to lean into that. And I think experience sometimes beats youth. But let me kind of zoom out here. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me talk about Jose Aldo's record real quick. He's won 32 fights. he hasn't had 32 fights. He's won 32 fights. He's finished 56% of those. Now, he's had 21 fights within the UFC itself, and he's won 14 of those. That's absolutely madness. Recently, he's done very, very well. Like I said, in this stage of his career, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of that win into this fight. So he has a 1-fight win streak. He's carrying a lot of momentum and support on his side. So now I want to talk about the reasons, aside from stats alone, as to why I'm confident in Jose Aldo pulling off this upset. And I went into a lot of detail in my prediction video earlier this week, so I'm going to try to keep it a little bit summarized. Otherwise, I'm just repeating information here. But just at a high level, when it comes to Jose Aldo, obviously he's going to utilize his experience. He also has really good fight IQ as a fighter, and I think that he's very adaptable as well, especially when it comes to fights. He's proven this time and time again in multiple fights. You could rewatch a lot of his fights, and you could see that he adapts on little key things throughout the fight, which really develop into a strong game plan and end up moving the fight in his favor. So I like that. I also really like Jose Aldo's ability to counter strike. I think that he has amazing defensive skills. I think his stats were like 60% striking defense, and Bautista, he had like 53% striking defense, and I think that that's not going to fare well against a guy like Jose Aldo. I think Jose Aldo will exploit that shortcoming on Bautista's end. Also, I really like Aldo's ability to control the pace when it comes to fights, and he also uses the range very, very well. It's not seen so much in his division, but Jose Aldo is one of those guys that does it extremely well, and I do appreciate that genuinely. I think there's a little bit of a takedown defense that could be exploited by Jose Aldo as well. Keep in mind, Jose Aldo has a 91% takedown defense, and so he's going to try to keep the fight standing, at least in my humble opinion, and I think that that's going to kind of negate Bautista's grappling advantage here, and so because of that, he's going to exploit that takedown defense advantage that he has. Also, man, you got to see this guy's leg kicks. Jose Aldo's leg kicks it's something about these Brazilian fighters and their leg kicks, man. Alex Pereira does the same, and they don't have the same type of leg kick, but it seems like leg kicks are a huge part of their game. Jose Aldo has some very devastating leg kicks, and honestly, it's a very signature part of, at least I remember early on in his career, it was a huge part of his game plan. And so if he kind of utilizes that can definitely slow Mario Bautista down and really limit his mobility and his kicking power. A couple other things just to kind of finish this off is Jose Aldo is very accurate when it comes to his strikes. He's very precise with his strikes, and I will say Mario Bautista, when I look at his fights, I can see and I can tell that he is the more active fighter. I will give him credit where it's due, but Aldo is the more precise striker, and sometimes the guy who can land those cleaner and more impactful shots really makes the difference in fights, and that's exactly what I expect to happen. Now, I think that when I looked back at Mario Bautista's fights, he really starts strong when it comes to fighting. And so Aldo, he does have proven cardio. So if he's able to kind of take over in the later rounds, and if he can survive that early pressure, that's where I think the opportunity really lies. And that's where I think that guys like odds makers, they just can't pick up on key stuff like that. So keep in mind, Mario Bautista, he is the favorite fighter to win. But I'm thinking with Aldo's experience, his technical striking, and his defensive skills, I think he has a pretty clear path to victory, if I'm being honest. And as long as he's able to utilize that game plan effectively, which, full disclosure, I expect him to do, I'm giving him a 61% probability of victory. So if he's able to do that, this should be Aldo's fight to win. So for the final promising underdog that I want to highlight before I jump into the key favorites that I really like, that are inexpensive, and then finally discussing the prop bets that I really, really like for UFC 307, the final promising underdog I want to highlight for you guys is actually Carla Esparza. And I know some of you guys think I'm absolutely mad for this, and then some of you guys actually agree. And let me make my case. You guys, you have your own say. I respect your opinion, and I'm just here to share some information and research that I was able to piece together. So first, let's look at Carla Esparza's stat advantages. Carla Esparza has a reach advantage in this fight against Tisha Pennington of 3 inches. She also absorbs about 1 less strike per minute. She lands 2.61 more takedowns on average, which is a key stat. She has a 21% higher takedown accuracy, which is another key stat, and she lands a little bit more submissions on average at 0.2, which could be a little bit of a key stat. All things considered, all of my analysis, fight film studying, the qualitative analysis, I'm giving Carla Esparza a 62% probability victory. I think she's a great underdog to feature on this card. Let's talk about her record. She's won 20 fights. She's finished 40% of them, but keep in mind, she's controlled 60% of them. And when it comes to control, she does very, very well. That's a huge part of her game plan. I touch base on that in my prediction video. Highly recommend you guys just check that snippet if you're curious for a little bit more in-depth information. She's had 16 fights in the UFC. She's won 11 of those 16 fights. Recently, she's won 4 of her last 5 fights. But she is coming off of a loss into this fight, to be fair, but she's still been killing it overall. The things that I really like about Carla Esparza and why I think she's actually going to win, it definitely has to do with her wrestling skills and her ability to control opponents on the ground. I think that she's also one of those fighters that uses and does very well with a pressure-heavy game plan, and I think that if she does that, literally tomorrow, then I think she'll be able to neutralize Pennington's striking and kind of wear her down over the 3 rounds that they fight. I also think that there's a little bit of an opportunity for her to look for kind of a late submission as Pennington gets a little bit tired. And that paired with her grappling skills, I think that goes very well, and it kind of highlights a weakness in Tisha Pennington's overall game plan. It's going to be very, very hard for Carla Esparza. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's easy by any means for Carla Esparza to win, but I think that she does have what it takes to kind of grind out this victory here. She also has really good experience that sometimes, as time goes on in MMA, we tend to forget some of the accomplishments that fighters have been able to pull off. It's a very fast sport, it's a very cruel sport, but that's exactly why we love it. It's kind of bittersweet. So I just wanted to take this moment to kind of reflect quickly on Carla Esparza's accomplishments within not only the UFC but in MMA in general. I want you to keep in mind that back in 2022, it was UFC 274, Oliveira versus Gaethje, great main event. Carla Esparza actually won the championship against Rose Namajunas, and now I'm going to take you a few years back, further than that. Quite a few years back. Back in 2014, she actually defeated Rose Namajunas again previously to win the championship again, and that was via submission. And so but now before then, I'm going to push back a little bit further. Back in 2013, she actually defeated Bec Rawlings, and that was back in Invicta FC. I want you to keep in mind that back in 2022, it was UFC 274, Oliveira versus Gaethje, great main event. Carla Esparza on that card defeated Rose Namajunas via split decision, but she was able to get the championship at that point. Now, going several years back in 2014, she had defeated Rose Namajunas also, and that was via submission, and she won the championship at that point as well. Now, she would go on to lose to Joanna Jacek, but still, good experience, right? Previous to that, she actually defeated Bec Rawlings. That was back in Invicta FC, and now we're talking January 2013. But all I want to say by mentioning all of this is that Carla Esparza she's been around. She's fought a lot of people. She's had her fair share of experience and pedigree in MMA, and so that experience definitely translates over to her fighting skills. I will say, to play devil's advocate here and kind of weaken my argument or be the voice of people who oppose what I'm saying and the fact that I'm leaning towards Carla Esparza, I will say there's a lot of challenges that Esparza is going to face in this fight. First of all, she's coming off of like a giant layoff. I think it's like 20 months, and that's after her giving birth. And I think it could potentially impact her performance here. And also, this is kind of her retirement fight, and sometimes we know what sport this is. We know what happens in MMA. If you're new here, there's no fairy tale endings. And if there is, you must be dreaming. Wake up. Because a lot of fighters, as they're going towards the end of their career, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And it's the reality of the world, and it's the reality of the sport. So I hope that that's not the case with this particular fight. I hope that this is one of those exceptions. And I think that I could make a little bit of a case as to why it can be an exception here. Also, I'm just going to be honest, Pennington does have better striking skills overall. She does have decent takedown defense. But I think that Esparza, she has to shake off that ring rust. She has to use her wrestling, and I'm really leaning towards that neutralizing Pennington's striking advantage. I think that if she can grind out a victory, it would be a unanimous decision victory or even maybe a split decision victory. But I do like the risk to reward ratio with Carla Esparza in this fight. Maybe I've been rambling too long about this particular fight, but I want to make my case and highlight opportunities for you guys. I'm not one of those guys who's just throwing stuff out of my butt. You know, I actually do my research, I do my homework, and I try to give you guys the best information that I can, the best analysis that I can, because I actually take a huge amount of accountability for my picks and for my underdog picks. All right, now we're going to switch gears, and now I'm going to talk about the promising favorites for this card, which I've chosen through 3 main criteria. First, they have a high statistical weighted confidence either through my prediction models or through fighter stat evaluation or some combination of both. Second, their opponent does not have a high probability of victory, so you're not going to notice any overlap between the underdogs I just showed you earlier and these fighters. And the third thing is that their odds aren't too expensive. If a fighter has like negative 600 or negative 700 odds, they're obviously just too expensive to pick, but you could always parlay them if you want. In this video, I'm going to focus more on finding you guys some value rather than just stating some obvious picks and pointing out those negative 600 type fighters. So I consider these 3 things for you guys, I do all the work for you guys, and then I show you the valuable picks that fit that criteria. And if you want to know how I predict each fight plays out and the results, please check out my prediction breakdown from earlier this week where I review stats, each fighter's fight history, the results of my 7 data science prediction models, my final picks, and the method of victory. Now for this portion of the video for these favorites, I'm only going to review their stat differentials that they have against their opponent. But again, if you want those in-depth breakdowns, please refer to that video from earlier this week. It will help you out. There's a lot more favorites that I like on this card that are relatively inexpensive and valuable, in my opinion, than there are underdogs. But now that we're done with the underdogs, let's go ahead and talk about these favorites. So first and foremost, Kevin Holland. Now, I'll talk about the stat advantages of Kevin Holland here. He has a height advantage of 1 inch here. He's 5 years younger than his opponent. He also has a reach advantage of 5 inches, which he utilizes very, very well when it comes to striking and range. He also lands 1.12 more strikes per minute. When you pair that with that reach, it's a very, very good combination. He also has a 7% higher striking accuracy, another key stat that goes well with those other 2 stats. He absorbs 0.17 less strikes per minute as well. Again, another key stat that, man, he's one of those fighters where his stats really complement each other, and it starts to become a huge advantage. And he also has a 21% better takedown defense. Now, all things considered, statistically and all my research outside of stats, I'm giving Kevin Holland a final 61.2% probability of victory. And I think he's right at that sweet spot when it comes to being a favorite. I do like his risk to reward ratio despite him being the favorite, so I wanted to mention him as the first favorite of this card. Now, the next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you guys is Joaquin Buckley. Now, Buckley is 11 years younger than his opponent here. He has a reach advantage of 1 inch. He lands 0.14 more strikes per minute. He has a 4% higher striking defense, and he lands 1.43 more takedowns on average. Now, he also has a 3% higher takedown accuracy and a 4% better takedown defense. All things considered, bottom line, I'm giving Joaquin Buckley a 65% probability of victory, so I do think he's a really good favorite on this card. The next fighter that is a favorite and is also relatively inexpensive is Yasmin Lucindo. Now, Yasmin is 15 years younger than her opponent here. She has a reach advantage of 1 inch. She absorbs 0.02 less strikes per minute, which is a very small number, but still something I wanted to mention. She has an 11% higher striking defense, lands 2 more takedowns on average, has an 11% higher takedown accuracy, has a 15% higher takedown defense, and lands 0.1 more submissions on average as well. All things considered, I'm giving Yasmin a 64.9% probability of victory, so she's also right in that sweet spot, really good risk to reward ratio. The next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you guys is Tim Means. Now, Tim Means has a height advantage of 3 inches. He lands 0.48 more strikes per minute. He has a 12% higher striking accuracy and a 15% higher takedown accuracy. All things considered, I'm pretty confident in Tim Means. I'm giving him a 71.1% probability of victory, so I do think he's also a really good favorite to feature on this card. Last but not least, the next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you guys before I get into the best prop bets that I noticed for UFC 307, it's going to be Alexander Hernandez. Now, Alexander Hernandez is a year younger than his opponent here. He has a reach advantage of 1 inch, and he lands 0.22 more strikes per minute. And I also really like the intangibles that he's bringing into this fight, which I covered a lot of in my prediction video earlier this week. All things considered, I'm giving Alexander Hernandez a pretty confident 69% probability of victory. So he's another one of those fighters that I think is going to do really well, that I feel pretty confident in based on everything I've researched, and that I wanted to mention for you all. Now let's review the bets that I think have value for this card and have a good statistical and stylistic possibility of happening. Please disregard prop bets where you're picking the other fighter to win. I'll start from the top of the card and work my way down. You'll see that I've laid out a few options for you guys depending on how risk averse you are and how much risk you're willing to take. So, starting from the top of the card for UFC 307, we have Alex Pereira versus Khalil Rountree Jr. Now, for this fight, I think you could take Alex Pereira via KO/TKO. I think that would be pretty obvious. If you're feeling a little bit more neutral and maybe you think Khalil has a decent chance, he's a strong guy, you could also take the fight not going the distance. I think that would be a safe neutral bet. And also, you could take the under 4.5, 3.5, 2.5, 1.5, depending on how confident you are. Again, we're going from the safest bets to some of the more riskier ones. I'm just giving you guys all the options that I really like on this card. Co-main event, Raquel Pennington versus Juliana Pena. I would consider the over 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, or even it going the distance if you're confident that they're not going to be able to get the finish. Keep in mind for that one, Juliana Pena does have a little bit high of a finish rate for women's MMA, so that you could be facing a little bit of risk there. That's why I have it in that particular order, so just keep that in mind. Going down further in the card, we have Jose Aldo versus Mario Bautista. Now, I have a couple of options here. I do like the Aldo money line. I know that's not a prop bet, but he is a good underdog, and I like that risk to reward ratio a lot, and I think he's actually going to pull it off. He's a pick of mine. I would take Aldo money line. Also, you could take the over 1.5, 2.5, or even the distance if you think that maybe the way that Aldo wins, or even the way that Mario wins, if you're leaning towards Mario and you're going with the favorites here, if you think that they're going to be able to take it to the judges and get the unanimous decision victory instead of either of them getting a finish, maybe you could take it going the distance. But you would have to roll the dice a little bit for that one. Then we have Caitlin Vieira versus Kayla Harrison. That one's going to be a very interesting fight, very heated, a lot of build up for that one. I would honestly consider Harrison via submission. She talks a big game. She has a great background. I think she finds a way to pull it off. I think she's going to struggle a little bit at first, just getting a little bit comfortable, but then her skills are going to kick in, her technical knowledge is going to kick in, and I think she will end up getting that submission. Going further in the card, we have Roman Dolidze versus Kevin Holland. I would honestly take Kevin Holland via decision. Nothing more on that particular fight that really spoke to me. Moving on, we have Stephen Thompson versus Joaquin Buckley. For that fight, I would consider the over 1.5, 2.5, or the fight going the distance. Neither guy really has, especially Stephen Thompson, neither guy really has a huge finishing ability. I know Joaquin Buckley is a little bit dangerous, but the way Stephen Thompson fights, he's very evasive and he's defensively sound most of the times, especially with that karate stance. He's able to kind of hop in and hop out. So I don't expect Stephen Thompson to get finished. I think he's a little bit more experienced than someone who's going to get finished by someone like Joaquin Buckley. Not to disrespect Joaquin Buckley. Anyways, over 1.5, 2.5, or going the distance. Let's move on. We have Marina Rodriguez versus Yasmin Lucindo. Honestly, the ones that spoke to me for that card, it's the over 1.5, 2.5, or the fight going the distance. For women's MMA, generally, you can't go wrong with the fight going the distance. If you want to play it safe, you could do the over 1.5 or something. Let's move on. We have Cesar Almeida. Great fighter, up and coming in the UFC, great background, even defeated Alex Pereira at one point several years ago, like almost 10 plus years ago or something. Him versus Iro Pereira, I would consider taking Almeida via KO/TKO. He does have that kind of crazy power, but even, if you want to be a little bit more neutral, you could take the fight just not going the distance, or even the under 2.5 or 1.5, because Ior does have a lot of power with him as well. So if either guy gets it done, you could play a little bit safe by doing those. Now we have Carla Esparza versus Tisha Pennington. Honestly, I would consider that fight very similar to our regular play for women's MMA, the over 1.5, 2.5, or the fight going the distance. You can't go wrong most of the time when it comes to women's MMA and the fight going longer than early on. Anyways, we have Ryan Spann after that versus Ovince St. Preux. So for that, I would consider taking Ryan Spann via KO/TKO, or the fight just not going the distance, or even the under 2.5. I wouldn't go under 1.5. I mean, I think that might be a little bit too risky, at least in my opinion, based on both guys. But I mean, maybe you guys think otherwise. I'm just highlighting the things that I noticed. Lastly, we have Alexander Hernandez versus Austin Hubbard. For that, very simple, I would keep it to the over 1.5, 2.5, or the fight going the distance. And with that said, that wraps up this video. I really appreciate you all for watching and being so supportive as always. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and check out that Patreon if you want to support me through there as well. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier, which includes early results, picks, and bets, and also includes premium data, analysis, and stats as well. Your support helps keep me encouraged and motivated to continue running all of this data and analysis for you guys and providing you guys all these insights. So thank you once again, and as always, see you guys in the next one.